Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to be here once again, virtually this time. Uh, so I don't believe that I've ever spoken about Dharanis for Hartford Street Zen Center, have I? No, I didn't. I didn't think I had. So um, this is easier to do in person when I can ask for a show of hands. But I'm not. I'm imagining that most of you who have practiced, um, at the Zen centers have heard Dharanis, since in the Soto tradition, there's the great compassionate heart Dharani and the wondrous auspicious Dharani for averting calamities. I happen to have picked up from City Center the book Zen Chants by Kazuaki Tanahashi. So those are in there as well as the Heart Sutra and various other things that are used in the Soto Zen tradition. And of course, Dharanis are very widespread throughout the Buddhist tradition generally. And even in Theravada Buddhism, I understand they have something called parita. I may not be saying that right, but they have their own version of chants. So Dharani practice is fairly ubiquitous. But I think maybe a lot of people don't really fully understand or know what Dharanis are. So I would like to share some of the background of them. I found a very helpful book by Paul Kopp called The Body Incantatory, Spells and the Ritual Imagination in Medieval Chinese Buddhism, which answered a lot of my questions about them. My own exposure to Dharani as a Nichiren Shu priest is that when I was in my final training to be fully ordained, the program is called Shinyo Dojo, and it occurs over a period of roughly a month and a half at Koanji Temple, located at Mount Minobu in Japan. There was an opportunity for those who had, I'm not going to dare say mastered, but those who were fairly good at chanting the sutra of the regular sutra passages, to take a little more of an advanced class and do the chanting of the Dharanis, which have kind of a little more complex rhythm than the usual chanting of the sutra. And Dharanis don't often get used in Nichiren Shu by the lay people or practitioners, regular priests. They're often just used by the priests who have undergone the Aragyo ascetic training for 100 days in the winter. And after that, they're empowered to do what are called keto prayers or blessings. And the Dharanis are a large part of that. So within Nichiren Shu, the Dharani practice is basically just something that the Aragyo priests do. But really anybody can do them, of course. So, and I enjoy doing them and make them part of my own regular practice. So I would like to share what the Dharanis are all about, and then give a demonstration or lead the chanting of the Dharanis in the Lotus Sutra. Of course, given this format, we can't all do it together, so I will just do the Dharanis myself, and if you wish to try to follow along, you are more than welcome to. So let me start my screen sharing and get into it. Let's see here. Okay. So Dharanis, they're often been translated as Buddhist spells, and they are often used in a way that spells would be used. So that is why I've called this talk the Dharanis Buddhist spell working. So what is a Dharani? And let's see if I can, unfortunately, I don't have a cursor and I've got everybody's faces in front of, I'll have to do it this way. All right. So Dharanis, the word Dharani can be translated as a code or a mnemonic device. And actually, it probably should be pronounced Dharani, like that, Dharani. I'm just going to keep mispronouncing it the American way, though. Dharanis. In East Asian Buddhism, the Sanskrit term Dharani is translated with these characters that you see here, and in Japanese pronounced Dharani. And they can also be translated, so these ideograms here are basically a transliteration to reproduce the sound of the Sanskrit word. They don't have any particular meaning themselves. But this next word, soji, means encompassing hold, and that is closer to what the Sanskrit word Dharani means. It is also translated with the ideograms that are pronounced in Japanese Himitsu Jinju, which means mystic sacred spells. So in esoteric Buddhism, Dharani are protective spells like mantras, but they're generally longer. So there's a lot of discussion about the difference between a Dharani and a mantra. And it seems to basically come down to the fact that Dharanis are just longer mantras. So what then is a mantra? The Sanskrit word mantra can be viewed as a charm or an invocation, a magic formula, or a spell. And in East Asian Buddhism, the Sanskrit word mantra is translated with ideograms that mean true word. And those ideograms, which are pronounced Shingon in Japanese, is the name of a school of Buddhism, the Shingon Shu, which specializes in esoteric practice. They were brought into Japan in the very early 9th century by Kukai, also known as Kobo Daishi. But they're not the only ones who do esoteric practice. Esoteric practice is also a specialty of the Tendai school, and of course, various other schools, including the Zen schools, also have varieties of esoteric practices that have filtered in. Mantras are used to invoke protective powers and the ultimate truth. They are believed to contain the sustaining power and merit of the Buddha, Bodhisattva, or guardian deity that they are associated with. Mantras also contain or are composed of Sanskrit seed syllables that are the concentrated essence of the being that they refer to. I have a diagram a little further down that has such seed syllables in it. And by the way, Sanskrit is it is not a writing system. Sanskrit is the language, and there are varieties of it. There's the classical Sanskrit of the Vedas. There's hybrid Sanskrit for Buddhist sutras. These are sometimes called, if I'm pronouncing it right, Prakrits, which means like Sanskrit dialects. So Sanskrit is written down with different script systems, like Siddham, for instance, and our Devanagiri, I think, is the other one. In East Asia, I believe they used primarily Siddham for the writing of Sanskrit seed syllables. So to recite a mantra is to invoke the actual presence of the Buddha, Bodhisattva, or deity whose seed syllables compose the mantra. An interesting thing about Dharani that I learned from the Paul Kopp's book is that very often they were written down. They weren't just spoken spells or invocations. They were used, well, I'll just read these passages here. In late medieval period in China, these and other Buddhist incantations were written, stamped, and printed on amulets, worn on the body. They were carved on pillars, such as the one I pictured here, written on funerary jars and coffins, and embedded in literary texts, like the Lotus Sutra, for instance. They were analyzed in extensive and densely philosophical commentaries and praised in miracle tales and poems. Stories about them or images from those stories were painted on cave shrine walls, and the spells themselves were personified and then painted, sculpted, visualized, and contemplated. So further on, he says, what is the ungraspable interfusion of mind and world? The inconceivable unity that is irreconcilable difference, the mystic quiddity of things. The metaphor was also a material reality. The material reality was also a metaphor. The domain of thought and bodily practice were interwoven. The mind was in the body, in ornaments and clothing, and those ornaments were in the mind. So somehow these Dharanis were able to encapsulate what we might call the spirit of Buddhist practice itself, and then made concrete. And the concrete, in turn, facilitated the practice and the spirit of Buddhism. So this is kind of this merger of body and mind in the forms of these inscribed Dharanis. So let's talk more about the word Dharani itself. As is well known, the word Dharani, like the word Dharma, is derived from the Sanskrit word, I'm not sure how to pronounce this root, dri, maybe, to support, which means to support, maintain, or hold. The derived term seems to have originally referred to the capacity to maintain one's hold of such things as scriptures in strengthening one's memory, of beneficial power in improving one's fate or karmic roots, or of one's self-composure, as well as the ability to increase one's grasp of, and a sense of understanding of or knack for, things ranging from Buddhist doctrines to contemplative textual objects to incantations. Some of the earliest extant uses of the term do not refer to mnemonics, spells, or syllables at all, but simply to a quality of the bodhisattvas, the spiritually advanced being. It was very helpful to read this because in the Lotus Sutra, for example, it refers to all the many Dharanis that the bodhisattvas have. And I always thought that just meant they knew a lot of spells. But what it's talking about is that they have this quality of being able to hold the Dharma for different purposes or different circumstances. A way of thinking of Dharani as a mnemonic, by the way, although as this passage shows, it's a lot more than simply a mnemonic device, is like Roy Biv. You know, if you're thinking the color, what are the colors in the rainbow? It's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So you take things like that and you turn them into chants that can be practiced, into these invocations. So that may be one of the ways in which Dharani came about, turning little mnemonic devices like Roy Biv into ways of summarizing, encapsulating whole strings of meaning and import. Let's see. Also, Dharani, which is translated into Chinese by a compound meaning having all, means maintaining. It is connected etymologically with dharana, which is a word that means concentration, and it's part of the eight-limbed yoga, which I'll talk about a little further down. It is connected etymologically, one of the classes of yogic practice, a word considered by the Mahayana Sutras to be synonymous with samadhi, or which it means meditation or concentration, according to the Tachitu Lun. The Tachitu Lun is the treatise on the Great Perfection of Wisdom Sutra that was attributed to Nagarjuna and may have been composed by Kumarajiva in, I believe, the 5th century in China. So according to the Tachitu Lun, concentrated practice and chanting the sutras is called the Dharani of maintaining what has been heard, while concentration on doctrine is called the Dharani of the ultimate. Here, Dharani retains its original meaning of preserving the Buddha Dharma. So this is from a book called Source Elements, the Lotus Sutra, by Keisho Tsukamoto, where there's this great chapter in there analyzing and discussing the Dharanis, the Lotus Sutra in particular. And it goes on to say, you can conjecture that Dharani, meaning the mental concentration of dhyana, was also used to express the highest wisdom, the Buddha wisdom attained as a result of mental concentration. And dhyana, of course, is the word that got corrupted in Chinese well, I don't know if it's corrupted, but transliterated with 2 Chinese characters that I guess roughly in Chinese would be Chan Na, and then they just dropped one character, and that character in Japan was translated as Zen. So jhana is Zen. So Dharani and Zen basically are very closely related terms. In Mahayana Buddhism, there is increasing emphasis that all misfortune may be averted by receiving and keeping the Dharani. by reciting an incantation, or by chanting, accepting, and copying sutras. The fact that Dharanis, Vidyas, and sutra recitation have been linked to averting misfortune is because all of these are condensations of wisdom, that is the Buddha Dharma, and are the materialization of it. Overcoming demons on the road to enlightenment was understood to represent the destruction of the spiritual obstacles of the defilements. Thus, a connection grew between overcoming spiritual demons and averting external harm, such as sickness and misfortune. It is not surprising, therefore, that the practitioner was thought to be able to arouse the power to destroy external obstacles by the power achieved through possessing the Dharani. So again, it's like a concretization of the power of our Buddhist practice. And just to say a little more about the word dharana, which Dharani is most connected with, many people today are familiar with the Ashtanga yoga, or 8 that was taught by Patanjali around the early centuries of the Common Era. And these are the parts of the 8-limbed yoga: yama and niyama. So yama is to refrain from violence, falsehood, stealing, sexual misconduct, and avarice. As you can see, this is almost the 5 precepts used in Buddhism. The only difference being instead of avarice in Buddhism, we have not to indulge in intoxicants. Niyama are positive injunctions to cultivate purity, contentment, self-discipline, study, and devotion. So these 2 limbs are the things you should not do or refrain from, and the things you should do to create an optimum lifestyle for taking up practice. And then, of course, there's the asana, or posture, one of which, of course, is the lotus posture, although there are others that can be used. And in fact, what people think of as yoga today is actually hatha yoga, a form of yoga for stretching so that one can hold an asana posture for a long period of time in a very stable way. So my understanding is hatha yoga really originally is supposed to mean, the kind of exercises you do so that you can do this part of the 8-limb yoga and just sit still or hold a single posture in a still, silent way for a good period of time. The 4th limb is the pranayama, which is regulation of the breath. The 5th is pratyahara, introspection, where you withdraw your attention from the outside world to the internal world, or to whatever the object of your meditation is going to be, whether that is the breath, or an image of a deity, or a colored disc, or whichever it might be. Once you have withdrawn that attention, then that's when you begin the practice of dharana, which is the control or gathering of the thought to a single point. And what comes out of doing that is dhyana. So dhyana is when you succeeded in holding your attention to that single point. And then samadhi is, in a sense, an intensification or the fulfillment of the dhyana practice, at least in the 8-limbed yoga system. Although they seem to be used a lot more interchangeably in Buddhism, depending on what school of Abhidharma you're looking at, the terms dhyana and samadhi. And interestingly enough, I don't often run into the term dharana in Buddhist texts. But I think it's good to know that where dharana fits in this kind of methodology of meditation. So you can see that the Dharani practice is really not just about spell working in a superstitious kind of manner. It is really an outgrowth of a way of practicing deepening states of concentration. And it is then attributed with the kind of powers that less sophisticated people would understand as being able to manipulate reality. But really, the what's happening is not an attempt to manipulate reality, but an attempt to cultivate the mind. And of course, there is no reality without the mind that is taking it in and interpreting it. So here is something else I found very interesting that the Kopp's book goes into, that there are 4 depths of Dharani practice according to the Bodhisattva Bhumi, or the stages of the Bodhisattva path. So he said it is one of the most often cited canonical discussions of Dharani, and famously divides the Dharani into 4 kinds. The first is called in Sanskrit Dharma Dharani, or this is all from Kopp, in my rendition, grasp of the teachings. So that would just be to remember the words. The second is called Artha Dharani, which is to grasp the meaning. Respectively, these 2 terms indicate the capacity to grasp and keep in mind the letter and the meaning of the teachings. The third form is called Mantra Dharani, or grasp of mantra spells. The precise meaning of this Dharani is the least agreed upon, and its basic sense is a grasp of, or that is a knack for employing, certain runs of syllables in various ways. And the final sort of Dharani is called Kshanti Dharani, or the grasp by which one attains the patient acceptance of a bodhisattva. So this Kshanti Dharani, this patience, is not just being patient waiting for a bus, for instance, but the kind of patient acceptance, and that's the same word that's one of the 6 perfections, Kshanti, the perfection of patience. It's the patient acceptance of the non-arising of all phenomena, that is, of the emptiness of all things, that things do not have a self-nature. And to be able to accept that and understand that and internalize that and to live that is the 4th and ultimate meaning of Dharani practice. The Kopp goes on to say, it is possible that these 4 are to be taken as stages of accomplishment, moving in the direction of a progressively more refined grasp of Buddha's teachings, beginning with simply remembering their letter, and then finally in the 4th stage of Dharani, attaining the patient acceptance of the fact that the phenomenal world is empty of any stable abiding essences, a state of being understood in the Buddhist tradition to result from a very high level of spiritual maturity. And this last form, the Dharani in which one attains the patient acceptance of a bodhisattva, consists, as Bharvig explains, in pondering a mantra until one understands its meaning, namely that it is without meaning, and accordingly understands all dharmas as being beyond expression. So attaining this understanding, the bodhisattva is able to abide without fear amid the unarisen phenomenal world. This is one of the loftiest states of spiritual attainment in Buddhism. So as I mentioned before, the Dharanis are composed of these seed syllables. In fact, oh, they're not on here. Oh, I'm sorry, I won't be able to show them to you. These characters, this is an illustrated version of a calligraphic mandala, and in the calligraphic version, these are usually represented by seed syllables. I'll talk about them in a moment. But the Dharanis are often said to be meaningless, but that is not really true. As I mentioned, they're composed of these seed syllables that represent different powers or beings, gods, goddesses, bodhisattva figures. Some of the words do have grammatical meaning. It's speculated that some of them may come from non-Sanskrit languages and got turned into Sanskrit. So, in which at one time they may have had meanings or had parts of them that had meanings, and then those meanings were lost as just the sound was retained for the power of the sound. But it is not the case that they're actually completely meaningless. And in fact, some people have reconstructed the meanings of some of these Dharanis. And for the Lotus Sutra Dharanis, I will show that they seem to be calls to a goddess-like figure, especially particularly fierce goddess-like figures. But in any case, that point about the 3rd and 4th levels, let me bring back here. It seems to me that 3rd level of Dharani practice is a way of understanding how to use these Dharanis in different circumstances that will encourage practice, bolster people's confidence, give them a sense that there is perhaps supernatural protection, um, as a form of skillful means to lead people into a deeper level of practice. That's my thought about what this can be about, that an understanding that the Dharani itself, apart from any conceptual meaning and apart from using it to just memorize things or increase the power of your memory, can be used to uh, cultivate the mind in a very powerful way. And then that final Dharani is to see that there doesn't need to be any grasp after any kind of meaning, neither in the Dharani nor in any particular phenomena, that the Dharani almost becomes a way of holding the Dharani, ironically becomes a way of letting go of everything, including the Dharani itself. Not sure if I'm making that very clear, but that's the kind of sense that I have of it. So let me move ahead to, before I get into the Dharani's Lotus Sutra, could I invite somebody who knows the Dharani for wondrous, auspicious Dharani for averting calamities, just so we can hear an example of a Dharani that's relatively short? Is there anyone who can do that? Yes, please go ahead.
This is the Sino-Japanese pronunciation, which at least sometimes would differ sharply from the actual Sanskrit, if there was an actual Sanskrit.
Right.
But anyway, this short Dhārani goes, Nomo sammanda motona noharaji kotosha sono nanto jito en gyaki unnon shifura hara shifura chishusa chishuri sohaja senchi gya shirie somoko.
Thank you, and thank you for pointing out that we are using the Sino-Japanese way of pronouncing the Dharanis. So that's an example of a Dharani widely used, at least in the Soto Zen tradition, and I'm sure more widely than that. In Nichiren Shu, we restrict ourselves to just doing the Dharanis from the Lotus Sutra. In fact, all of our practices, not everything comes from the Lotus Sutra, but pretty much everything is centered on the Lotus Sutra, and almost everything derives directly from the Lotus Sutra. Although we do things like the Kaikyo-ge are the four Bodhisattva vows, which do not come from the Lotus Sutra. So let me now get into the Lotus Sutra Dharanis. So let's see here. I'm trying to arrange my screen so I can see. So what you're looking at here is a pictorial version of the calligraphic mandala that is used as the honzon, or focus of devotion, in Nichiren Buddhism. And going down the center here is Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, which means devotion to the Sutra of the Lotus Flower, the wonderful Dharma. And this is Nichiren right here. And all of these other figures are the various personages who are in the Lotus Sutra, with a few exceptions. Fudo Myoho and Aizen Myoho are two Vidyarajas, or knowledge kings. Vidya, by the way, means like a knowledge of supernatural power or hidden power. It's a word that was used in one of the passages I was reading up above, and is very closely related to mantras and Dharanis and such things. These two are not in the Lotus Sutra, but they were very important in the kinds of practices that Nichiren was doing and trying to assimilate to the practice of Lotus Sutra. So they are present on the calligraphic mandala in the form of bijas, or siddham, seed syllables. in the four corners here, you have the four Lokapalas, or four heavenly kings who guard the four directions. So like Vaishravana is one of them here. And then you have Shakyamuni Buddha and many treasures Tathagata, who are present together in the Lotus Sutra. Many treasures is a sort of a relic body of a Buddha from the primordial past who comes to testify to the truth of the Lotus Sutra. These surrounding them are the four leaders of the bodhisattvas who emerged from underground. I'm not going to get into all this, who exactly everybody is, but I just want to give a basic familiarity. And then you have Manjushri and Samantabhadra. No, wait, that's Manjushri and that's Samantabhadra Bodhisattva. And then you have Medicine King and Maitreya. And then you also have Ananda and Mahakasyapa. And you have the gods of the sun, moon, and stars. Mara is actually there. You have the wheel-turning kings and Devadatta, the king of the Nagas, or the dragons, and the Asuras. That's Devadatta, actually, and that's King Ajatashatru. And then you have a sort of a demoness who gets converted by the Buddha into a protective goddess figure named Hariti, and her 10 Rakshasi daughters. They're going to figure into the giving of the Dharanis in the Lotus Sutra. And down here you have a lineage chart, in a way, of people who passed on the Lotus Sutra. So Nagarjuna, Tiantai, and Miao Lo, and Dingyo. And then you have two Shinto deities down here, Hachiman and Amaterasu. So some of these figures are going to be responsible for bestowing Dharanis upon practitioners of the Lotus Sutra. So I will now get into that. There are two chapters where Dharani appear in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 26, which is called Dharanis, and chapter 28, called the encouragement of Samantabhadra Bodhisattva, and he also gives Dharanis. I'm only going to cover the Dharanis from chapter 26 here, because I think that's enough to deal with. And I'll just briefly go through who each of the figures. The first one is Medicine King Bodhisattva, or Vaishajiraja, Yakuo in Japanese. And this Bodhisattva represents the healing power of the Buddha. And he and his brother Medicine Superior figure prominently throughout the Lotus Sutra. And in chapter 26, he says, thereupon Medicine King Bodhisattva said to the Buddha, world-honored one, now I will give Dharani spells to the expounder of the Dharma in order to protect him. The next figure is Brave and Giving Bodhisattva, and he appears among 80,000 bodhisattvas present in the former assembly on Mount Sacred Eagle in the first introductory chapter of the Lotus Sutra. So there's 3 assemblies in 2 locations in the Lotus Sutra, and the first is on the ground in the middle section of the sutra. It all happens up in the air. It's called the assembly in space, and that's where things get very trippy, and time and space get expanded and contracted. And in the third part, they all return to the ground, and that's the latter assembly on Mount Sacred Eagle. So this bodhisattva has been present from the very beginning. And he says, thereupon, Brave and Giving Bodhisattva said to the Buddha, world-honored one, I will also utter Dharani in order to protect the person who reads, recites, and keeps the Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wonderful Dharma. If he keeps these Dharanis, this teacher of the Dharma will not have his weak points taken advantage of by any yakshas, rakshasas, putanas, krityas, kumbhandas, or hungry spirits. These are various forms of demons and spiritual predators in India at that time. The next one is one of the 4 heavenly kings, or Lokapalas, Vaishravana, whose name means hearing everything, and he is considered their chief. He protects the teaching place of Shakyamuni Buddha and hears him teach, so he is known as hearing everything. He resides halfway up Mount Sumeru, the mountain that's supposedly at the center of the world, and is the guardian deity of the north who presides over winter. And he says, Thereupon, hearing everything, Heavenly King, the protector of the world, said to the Buddha, World-honored one, I also will utter Dharani in order to protect this teacher of the Dharma out of my compassion towards all living beings. Next, one of the other Lokapalas also provides Dharani. This one is called Dhritarashtra, or Nation Upholding. Thereupon, Nation Upholding Heavenly King, accompanied by thousands and billions of Nayatas of Gandharvas who were surrounding him, respectively came to the Buddha, joined his hands together, and said to him, World-honored one, I also will protect the keeper of the Sutra, the Lotus Flower, the wonderful Dharma, with Dharanis, with divine spells. And then finally, we have Hariti, who I mentioned. In Japanese, she's called Kishimojin. And she and her 10 daughters, the 10 Rakshasis, come to the Buddha, and together with, let's see, here we go. Together with the mother of demons and her children in attendance, and they all together say to the Buddha, World-honored one, we also will protect the person who reads, recites, and keeps the sutra, the lotus flower, the wonderful Dharma, so that he may have no trouble. No one shall take advantage of the weak points of this teacher of the Dharma. So one thing to notice here is that these figures who are bestowing Dharani are kind of doing it conditionally. They're not just Dharanis that you can use for anything. They're specifically for the teacher of the Dharma, meaning the teacher of the Lotus Sutra. And in several places in the Lotus Sutra, it says the teacher of the Dharma, the Lotus Sutra, keeps, reads, recites, expounds, and copies the sutra. So, they keep or receive it and treasure it. They read it, and then from memory, they can recite it and share it with others. Then they can expound upon its meaning, and finally make copies of it and promulgate it to, get it out there, get it to spread. So this is like putting the Dharma in the world. And of course, this kind of idea goes back to in the part of the Pali Canon where the Buddha, in the very beginning, once he has gathered 60 of the first people to become monks, almost immediately he sends them out in different directions and says, go out into the world out of compassion for the many and teach them the Dharma. So this is kind of a literary expansion of that. So the idea here is that you can have these Dharanis, receive these Dharanis, and use them on the condition that you are a teacher of the Dharma. That is their purpose, to protect the teacher of the Dharma. So I'm going to do these Dharanis, and I'm going to start it to qualify as a teacher of the Dharma by chanting Daimoku. I won't do it very long. It's like I'll do 10 recitations, and then I will get into the Dharanis, the Lotus Sutra, and you're all welcome to join me in that. I think I will repeat the Dharanis, the Lotus Sutra 3 times. I'll do it slow once, then I'll do it a little faster, and then I'll do it at a very fast clip so you can hear the different speeds. In Nichiren Shu, it is taught that of these 5 practices, the most important is keeping the Lotus Sutra, and that the other ones are all implied in that one. So if you can at least keep the Lotus Sutra, that qualifies you as a teacher of the Dharma. So keeping it means to accept it joyfully. So Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, expression of accepting joyfully. As this is the Sino-Japanese, or the Japanese pronunciation of these Chinese characters. Namu means I devote myself to. Myoho is Sadharma, or the wonderful Dharma. Renge is Pandarika, the lotus flower, and Kyo is Sutra, or a thread of discourse. All right, so let me show you these Dharanis themselves. And the first one is by Baishiraja, and that one is the longest of these, as you can see. All of this is the one given by our Medicine King Bodhisattva. And here you can see the possible meanings of these seed syllables. O she who is exceptional, O she who is known, O she who has thought consciousness. And it goes on like that. So as I'm reciting these, you can read them through. it's not known who this goddess figure is exactly. Some people have thought Prajna Paramita. Um, Other people have thought it might be like one of these fierce um, local Indian goddesses. There's different goddesses of different villages and regions. Kishimojin example, or Hariti rather, is an example of this, where she has this fierce side, but if you can get her on your good side, then she becomes a protector. Let's see, so that's by Shirajas. The next one is um, the other Bodhisattva, Pradhanashura, and his are a little shorter. And then the next one is Vaishravana's Dharani. Those are very short, but this is all of them. And then the other Lokapala, also very short. And then finally you have, this is Kishimojin. Her other name is Bhutamata, and her Rakshasi daughters. And that rounds out the end of this string of Dharanis. So at this point, just before I share with you this practice and the sound of it, I'll open it up to any questions or comments anybody might have. So anybody?
Go ahead and you can kind of wave us down. Although I'm in the wrong view. Or
Yes, go ahead. I can't see names here.
oh, you can't.
No.
Let me.
Is that me?
Yeah, Hokai, yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your talk, Reverend. What I'm curious about, like theologically about having mystical faith, because I'm hearing of people saying in our country, I don't need to wear a mask because, I have Jesus to protect me. And I'm just wondering, about like, it's great to have like, in the Lotus Sutra, it says that Avalokiteshvara will rescue you.
Right.
And I want to have that faith, but I also want to also be careful, and I feel like people might, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity, might feel, or any religion, like, oh, if I wear a mask, then I'm not really having true faith in the mystical. So could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's a very good point. The one thing that comes up in my mind is actually something that Muhammad said, or is attributed to Muhammad. He supposedly said, "Trust in God, but tie up your camel first." And I think that's exactly the right attitude. That, to me, I am very skeptical about anything metaphysical, and I have kind of little patience for people who get too wrapped up in metaphysics and taking the supernatural literally. But at the same time, I love this kind of symbolic play, as it were. And I do believe in its efficacy insofar as it does have a direct impact on our mind and our attitude. And that on our mind and attitude in turn has an impact on our immune system, on, just us physically.
Mm-hmm.
But, do I think that it's, pulling on the hidden strings that run the world? I don't buy into that. So I think that we need to do the practical things we need to do, like wear a mask, keep our distance, etc. That we should not presume upon any kind of spiritual or hidden protections. But at the same time, take care of the mind too. The mind is a very important and very integral part of our reality. No mind, no reality. And the nature of our mind determines the nature of our reality, for at least us individually. So I think to do these kind of practices can have a very positive impact as long as we don't become superstitious or start presuming upon them.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Just a quick comment. One of my favorite Christian sayings that I was taught as a kid was, "Jesus has no hands but yours."
Yeah. 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 That's it. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
Welcome. Anybody else? Yes, go ahead. Again, I don't see names, so
Victoria. I
Victoria.
don't know
Yeah,
where it's come from, but I prefer it's better to be careful than to be sorry.
right, right, exactly.
So probably it can combine, with Buddhist teaching.
Yeah,
But, is also to take care of yourself, to be careful.
yeah. I know that I've been maybe not perfectly careful, but I've tried to be careful. I'm not going um, hanging out in crowded beaches or anything. Um, I bring my mask with me when I go out. Um, I've had, aside from going to stores or pick up from like Taco Bell or something, I've had only had contact with my housemate and like a couple other people during all this time. Yet, doing all these things to keep yourself safe, there's still a high level of anxiety and anxiety for your loved ones, anxiety for, all the things that you can't control. You can do so many things to kind of, control, but there's still all that anxiety. And I think one of the things that Dharanis and mantra practice can do is take all of that anxious, fretful energy and get it focused and calm and bring it back into your practice. Uh, the teacher Tiantai in 6th century China, even he set forth 4 different ways of cultivating samadhi. These 4 were all sitting, all walking, walking and sitting, and neither walking nor sitting. This is the old Buddhist tetralemma, trying to come up with 4 alternatives that will cover everything. But the idea was that, there's the simple sitting practice, and then there's chanting practices you can do while you're walking, circumambulating. And then there's like ritual practices that combine both. And then the 4th one is neither walking nor sitting means just whatever you're doing. Watch your mind, watch what's going on, whatever you're doing. But in the first one, even for the all sitting practice, he says that, if you find that you can't get your mind focused or you start to get sleepy or whatever, then, use these kind of chants, use this sort of these devotional practices and mantra like practices to bring that energy back and get it focused in. So, okay. Anybody else? If not, I will go into the practice of the Dharani, and like I said, I'll do the Daimoku for a little bit. Then I'll run through the Dharanis 3 times, and then I can open it up to any further questions or comments. So I will start to do that then. Need to there. Move things around on my screen here. Oh no. There, get back there. Okay. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. 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 Ani mani mane mamane shire shari te shamya shabi Tai sente mokute mokutabi shabi ai shabi sobi shabi shai ashai agini sente shabi Dharani ado kyaba shaha shabi shani nebi te bentada nebi te tanda hare shudai ukure mukure arare harare Shugya Shia Sanma Sambi Bodha Bi Kirijite Daruma Hari Shite Sogyane Kushane Basha Basha Sutai Mantara Mantara Shayata Urota Kyosharya Shara Shaya Taya Abaro Amanya Taya Zade Maka Zade Uki Moki Are ara ha te ne de ta ha te ichi ni shi chi ni ne di chi ha chi adi na di to na di ya na ro na bi ku na bi ya kyane kuri kenda di senda di Matogi joguri budo shani achi debi ni debi ya debi roke take tokumu shobonin. All right, see about doing that a little faster. There we go. Ani mani mane ma mane shide shadi te shamya shabi tai sente mokute mokutabi shabi ai shabi sobi shabi shae ashae agini sente shabi Dharani ado kyaba shaha shabi shani nebi te abentada nebi te atanda hare shudayo kude mukude arade harade shugyashi asanma sanbi Oda Bhigite Dharma Rishite Sogyane Kushane Basha Basha Sutai Mantara Mantara Shaya Taudo Takyo Shadya Shada Shaya Taya Baro Amanya Nataya Zade Maka Zade Yuki Moki Are Ada Hate Nele Te Nele Tate Chini Chini Shichini Nele Chini Nele Chia Chia Nadi Tonari Anaro Nabi Kunabi Kane Kudi Kendari Sendari Matogi Joguri Budo Shani Achi Debi Ni Debi Doke Take Toke Tokumu Shobonin. And one last time. Ani mani mane ma mane shide shadi te shamya shabi tai sente mukute mukutabi shabi ai shabi sobi shabi shai ashai agin sente shabi Dharani ado kyaba shabi shani nebi te abentana nebi te atanda Hare Shudaya Kude Mukude Arare Harare Chugyashi Asanma Sambi Bodha Bhijite Dhamadi Shite Sogane Kushane Basha Basha Shutai Mantana Manta Shaya Taudo Takyo Shada Shaya Taya Baro Amanyana Taya Zade Makas Uki moki ade ara hate ne de ta hate ichini shichini ne chini ne chi achi ari nadi tonari anado nabi kunabi kane kudi kendari sendari matogi joguri budo shani achi debi ni debi a debi doke take tokumu shobo ni. There. So that is how you do the Dharanis of the Lotus Sutra. So thank you all very much. Are there any other questions or comments about these Dhāranis or other related subjects? Anybody?
I have a
Yes.
question. I'm just curious what part recitation like that plays in, say, the daily observance in the Nichiren Shu?
Yeah, actually, it really doesn't. What I have seen is that the Dhāranis are pretty much only used by the priests who have done the Aragyo ascetic training, and then do the Kido prayers, and then they use the Dhāranis for that. In fact, there are several videos on YouTube of the Aragyo priests in Nichiren Shu doing these kind of special blessings, or sometimes they're even called exorcisms, using the Dhāranis. Otherwise, it's like purely optional. It's not part of the daily practices.
Thank you.
But I think they're a lot of fun, so I like doing them. Yes. Anybody
Can I ask you a
else?
question?
Yes, go ahead.
Thich Nhat Hanh, he describes the practice, I think in Buddhist time, he called it driving the peg.
Called it
It was a reference, driving the peg.
Okay.
It was like if you were trying to repair furniture and there was the wooden peg was the nail, and if it was rotting out, they would put another one behind it and knock it in.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And so, and I think that Thich Nhat Hanh, when he refers to it, is saying, if you have a deeply negative mind state, sometimes you have to make active effort to drive a new mind state in its place.
Right. So I think
So I'm wondering,
would be very helpful with that. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. In fact, I would almost think that they were designed especially to do that. Yes, anybody else? Richard, if you're talking, I can't hear you. You're on mute. Okay, now I can hear you.
I'd just like to say that it was very soothing just listening to the your recitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, Vittoria.
Just to say thank you very much, because this chapter for me has always been murkier. I was never really sure, and again, precisely because of these spells. And this talk for me, it has been pure joy. And your recitation, it was just lovely. And I think you should include it somewhere, maybe in the website.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really a good clarification of the chapter that can be a bit obscure. Really good.
Actually, Mark and I are working on a new service book that we're going to put on Amazon, and the Dhāranis will be included in that.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And other chapters. Do you include 10?
Well, basically, I think we're just going to have 2 and 16 and maybe 21 and then the Dhāranis.
21, yeah. Yes.
Right. Yeah, let me talk about that for a moment. So the last chapters of the Lotus Sutra, the last 6 chapters, especially, because chapter 22 closes out the assembly of space that I was talking about. And then you have these 6 chapters about various bodhisattvas and the Dharani chapter, and they're almost like a bodhisattva appendice, just stuck on the end of the Lotus Sutra, because it really seems like it ends at chapter 22. And I think the way I relate to those chapters is that they're ways of showing how to bring the practice into the world. But they may not seem very practical, because the kind of magical displays and supernatural powers that are shown in these chapters are not something that, any of us can relate to outside of like a Marvel cinematic universe movie. But I think that they are using this mythopoeic way of speaking, trying to show us a different kind of attitudes and ideas that we should carry forward in our practice. So this idea of the confidence that the Dhāranis give us, whether in chapter 26 or 28, are displaying the benefits of in your life, how your life changes positively to influence your family and people around you is the theme of chapter 27. Being able to be all things to all people is the theme of chapter 24 and 25 in some ways, where these bodhisattvas can appear as many different figures. So you have to kind of extract from the myth and poetry, what is it trying to say that we can do to bring that spirit of the Lotus Sutra into the world? I would also say this, because you asked me what chapters the Lotus Sutra will be in the service book. So traditionally, well, before Nichiren, the 4 chapters that I think had the most impact on people and still do to many people today is 2 and 16, because 2 is where the Buddha begins speaking. And chapter 2 is where the Buddha first talks about the one vehicle, that no matter what way you're entering into the Dharma, the ultimate goal for all of these ways is to become a Buddha oneself. So it's all flowing into one vehicle. And so 2 is very important for the more or less straightforward presentation of that. 16 is important because then the Buddha says, you think I became enlightened only a little while ago, but my Buddhahood has no beginning or end. So that really opens up what Buddhahood is and makes it, on the one hand, something that is ungraspable, and on the other hand, something that is very, very immediate. The Buddha didn't die a long time ago. We're not waiting for the next Buddha to appear. The Buddha's always now. So 16 is important. Chapter 14 has always been very important because of all the chapters of the Sutra, it seems to have the most practical advice for being in the world. The 4 peaceful practices of body, mind, speech, and vows or determination. And also chapter 25 has been very important because that's the chapter of Kuan Yin, or Regarder of the Cries of the World, who says, if you just call on her name, you will be saved. And she's always there for you, very much the savior kind of figure. Nichiren shifted this emphasis. He shifted from chapter 14 to chapter 13, which talks about all of the persecutions someone upholding the truth may meet in the world from those who are very biased. So the shift is away from peaceful practices to practices of enduring hardship. And then he shifted from chapter 25, and in fact, you may have noticed on that mandala I showed earlier, Kuan Yin's not even on it. He shifted from that chapter to chapter 21, which is where the Buddha, now presenting himself as the Buddha who became enlightened in the remotest past, transmits the Dharma to the bodhisattvas who appeared from underground to spread the Lotus Sutra in the latter age, when things have become degenerate and the Dharma is in danger of being lost. So, there's this shift away from peaceful mind your own business practices and relying on saviors to a practice of endurance and being a witness in the world despite all the hardships. Also, Nichiren shifted the emphasis to chapter 20, Bodhisattva never despising, whose practice was just to greet everybody and say, you too will become a Buddha, so I will always respect you. Nichiren put a lot of emphasis on that chapter as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see.
I think, sorry, maybe it's going on 11, so maybe one more question.
Okay. Yes, Mark.
I need to unmute.
Put in the chat a link to a YouTube video that is a real treat. So before you hang up on Zoom, maybe copy paste that. It's a Nichiren Shu priest who is doing the Dharanis that you heard Reverend Ryuei reciting, but he's got a jazz trio backing him up. It's outrageously fun to watch. You'll get a real kick out of it. And then the last thing is what you saw, Michael's, this is an actual version of the calligraphic mandala.
Yeah.
And in the middle, left and right, you can see the Siddham characters that he talked about. that were the seed syllables.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, they're rather large on the left and right in the center. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that jazz video is really cool. Thanks for linking that. I came across it when I was looking for videos to use for an earlier version of this presentation, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. So, all right.